Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us over here at Metric Insights today, where we're going to be discussing a practical guide for making your data catalog strategy work. I'm Mike Smitherman, head up sales and marketing over here at Metric Insights, and I've got Marius Moscovici with us on the call today. Hi, Marius.
Hello, Mike. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining.
The usual housekeeping pieces. So obviously lines are muted because it's a pretty big audience today, but this does get recorded, so you'll get a link to this shortly after the webinar. And as always, we're happy to field questions as we go through this. So you'll see the Q&A window on the right-hand side. Feel free to enter any questions as we go along. We'll either pick those up as we go or spend some time at the end if there are any. And usual format, so Marius is going to cover some slides this morning, and then we're going to be taking a look at some product demo stuff as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Marius.
Thank you, Mike. And so today, really, this talk was inspired by the fact that we've just seen kind of time and time again, and so many different folks that we talk to, whether it's our customers or other people we talk to in the industry, that the same pattern evolve over and over again, where that these data governance initiatives fail, and the deployments of data catalogs really just fail to meet the goals that were there, that to achieve that what people had aspired and hoped for. And so we wanted to talk about really, so what are some of the missing pieces in that? What are people doing wrong? And how can you really think of strategies to level up and to make sure that your environment doesn't fall the same, that doesn't suffer the same fate, that you have a happy ending to your a data cataloging journey rather than a sad one. And so we're going to start off by talking about why data governance is important and what kind of motivates that in most organizations. What are they trying to do when they're trying to solve for governance, and then really dig into like what typically happens in a typical data catalog deployment journey, and where things go wrong and why those things go wrong. So that's really important. Understanding the why is very important. And then we're going to really identify sort of how you can address those points, how you can address those pain points by really using a BI portal as part of your governance solution, because I think that's one of the big missing pieces that's out there that causes a lot of failures. So first, let's start by talking about why people do governance, right? And it's always almost always about pain, right? And if you have an ungoverned environment, you feel a certain amount of pain, quite a bit of pain, in fact. And so the things that drive governance is addressing that pain, which is things like compliance. That's usually top of mind, right? You absolutely need to make sure that you are going to address GDPR requirements, HIPAA requirements, whatever other governance requirements you have around securing personal sensitive data, securing all other kinds of identifying data, and that because frankly, you're exposed to all kinds of nasty fines and issues that happen if that you don't do that. So that's a must-have, and that's where you start. But really, it's not the end. People feel the pain of data discoverability in most organizations. That just you might, if in a large enterprise, you have thousands of tables, maybe tens of thousands of different data tables and all kinds of different data sources all over the place, and an analyst coming in, there's no way for them to really discover what are the best things to use. They have to rely on talking to somebody who might know that, and then when people leave, a lot of their institutional knowledge is gone. So that idea of like, hey, I want to be able to go find a data set that I want to work with to solve a particular problem, and I'm using the thing that is the trusted source, that's a pretty major pain point that organizations try to solve with these catalogs. And then, of course, consistency. I want to be able to make sure that I'm finding the data source that has the data that matches all of the other data that we're reporting. I don't want to create a dashboard that provides sales numbers that are inconsistent with the other sales numbers that we have. So understanding, how do we make sure that that consistent data is there, and how do we understand that lineage is there, right? Like understand that I'm looking at this number and where does it come from? Is this the sales data from our data warehouse where it's been cleansed, or does this come directly from Salesforce where maybe it's more raw and doesn't have all of the cleanup and processes and rules applied to it when I'm looking at the number? So all those kinds of things, very important. And if you don't have that lineage tracking, there's a lot of confusion, and it creates a barriers towards really effective data literacy. And then, of course, finally, data quality, right? So, you want to be able to make sure that you have good governance in order to be able to say, that I know that the data is of high quality. If there are data quality issues, I know what they are, and they've been communicated all the way up the chain so that nobody is using an analytic or an analysis and assuming that it's correct when we, in fact, know that there was a problem with the ETL process or there was a problem in the source. And so today, that data is not good and it should be ignored, right? So that kind of a distinction. So people look at those set of problems and they say, aha, what am I going to do? I'm going to just deploy data catalog. That's going to be an answer because data catalogs have features that look like they address those particular concerns, right? And so this journey begins, right? And you go out and you pick a data catalog and you deploy it, whatever it might be. Maybe you have Purview or Alation or Calibra or any number of other independent other smaller vendors, or maybe you build your own data catalog. However it is, you just deploy one in there in your environment. And that data catalog then gets plugged into all of your data sources, and it goes about sort of crawling out there and ingesting all the metadata from those sources, right? So this is a common model. So I'm going to just go in there so I can understand what is my metadata, what are my table definitions, structured, unstructured data, what is everything that I have out there, catalog it, have it all available in one place, right? And then I'm going to, of course, auto tag sensitive data. So I'm going to, one of the key things I want to do is make sure I know everything that contains social security numbers or any other PII data or emails or anything like that, and make sure that we know what that is. And so that if we need to purge that, we know every place that needs to be purged. We know we're treating it with the right level of security so that we've got the data in a way that it does not get exposed inadvertently to other bad actors, things of that nature. So all of that is part of the process. As part of a data catalog journey, typically you might enable it to do lineage. So it might crawl through your scripts that do your ETL processing, or if you're using maybe an Informatica, maybe it's using that process. It's going out there and looking to see, how did I get from source to target so that I can identify for a particular table what is my lineage, right? And that addresses that particular pain point. And then, of course, you might define ownership, maybe definitions, maybe glossary terms, all these things. You capture all those in the data catalog so that it can really be the place that you go if you want to know, what is my definition of a sales? What is retail sales? What is churn? What is a definition of the customer, a reseller, whatever it is, right? So all of that ownership terminology, etc., all that gets put in a tool. And this is a process. It may take some number of weeks or months, and you go through this with your entire environment, and then you flag, of course, any data quality issues that are known out there, so that there's one repository for knowing all that information. So you've got that there, and then you launch it. You announce it to the enterprise. Tell all the analysts, hey, come in here and come check out our new data catalog. It is the one-stop shop for everything data. You can come in here, you can understand what's going on. In some of these data catalog tools, I can even, have a data marketplace where I can subscribe to a particular product to say, hey, give me this particular set of table. I'm looking for a table now. I don't have access to it, and let me request access. So all these tools are there. And sure enough, when you launch with catalog, you'll initially get this high level of interest among the analysts. Everyone's coming in, checking it out. What's going on here? May even get some good feedback. Hey, it's about time. It's great that we have it. So you're pretty excited about the fact that you've got a really great solution. But that's where the happy part of the story ends, right? Because almost every time, if you were to look, if you've gone through this journey with a data catalog, if you were to look at your usage numbers, if you look at them 3 months, 6 months, a year after its launch, you find that the usage curve just goes down, and it goes down dramatically. And in fact, it's very common that really maybe you have a few of the data governance folks that are still using, maybe a small minority of people that are really passionate about governance, working with the data catalog, and then the wide swath of the organization. The analyst that's out there just building a Tableau or Power BI dashboard every once in a while, the person that's writing SQL statements to pull data into Excel, the business user that's consuming those analytics and wants to try to understand, what am I looking at here? How is sales measured here? They're not going into these tools, right? They're just not leveraging. So all that effort, maybe you can kind of check the compliance checkbox, but the rest of those checkboxes, really hard to say that you've gotten what you expected out of them. Because if people are not using the tool, they're not getting at the data, you're not getting any value, right? And so that's what happens, and we've seen this time and time again. It is madness, right? Because people repeat this process over and over, and the same outcome happens every time. And so, like, to understand kind of how to reverse the cycle, right? I think first we need to try to understand, like, why does that happen? Why does this approach that seems reasonable enough on the face of it, right? And I'm just going through the installation process and putting a tool that looks like a good tool. It is probably a good tool, right? To implement. Why does it not work? Why does it not achieve my goals? Well, there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, these data governance tools, and this really applies to all of them, they're all difficult to use. And it's not they're not by design, right? It's not like somebody intended to make a difficult tool. It's just that it's a complex problem. The process of going out there and flagging all this data, managing all this data, having the metadata, having the lineage, having all the different governance rules and supporting governance rules in a complex enterprise, and all it requires a very complex solution. In fact, if you were to look at many of these governance tools, you'll be encountering all kinds of nomenclature that you've never heard of before. It's completely foreign from current BI nomenclature. And so there's this like huge ramp up curve to understand, what is an asset, and how does it relate to something I actually know, like a report. And when I talk about lineage, what is it really showing me? What all these things mean? So that's a problem, right? Because people don't naturally don't want to spend a lot of time learning a whole new set of terminology, a whole new language to understand what to answer a basic question, to say, well, what does sales mean, right? And if you ask them to do that, then that's not going to work, right? So that's a major thing, and barrier. The second barrier is that simply by virtue of the fact that you have a tool that has to be exhaustive. You need to go out there and get all of your data, right? And you've got to catalog it all, because you need to know, do I have PI data in this little data mart that was created 3 years ago or not, right? And so all that, it has to be exhaustive. Because of that, you bring in a whole lot of junk. Right? Sure, you have the really high value data sets that are in your data warehouse, but you also have all kinds of obsolete, duplicative content, tables that have not been used in forever, stuff that doesn't have any good governance around it. All of that is in your system. And so when somebody comes in there and they're doing a search, they're presented not just with a good certified content, but there's like a sea of other content. And that creates a barrier, right? Because most people, when they want to come in, they don't care about seeing everything that's there. They just want to know, hey, what's the trusted source for sales data that I should use for my analysis? And that's all they want. And if you give them more than that, then you're just cluttering the experience, slowing them down, and getting to achieve their goal. And then finally, I think this is in many ways, even most importantly, it the governance tool by itself, a data catalog, is just not in the middle of a process flow for pretty much any user, right? So whether it's that is the analyst who's going out to build a dashboard, they're going to be in those dashboarding tools. They're going to be in Tableau or Power BI or Click or wherever it is, whatever tool you use. They're going to be in there, kind of figuring out, hey, how do I go build this dashboard that I need to build for my business unit, right, for my sales team or whatever. Um, they're not in the governance tool when they're doing that. And so they have to think about, oh, I have a question. I need to go to the governance tools. They've taken out of the flow that they're in. Similarly, the business user, they're just inside of that report. They're using dashboards. They're using PDFs. They're using spreadsheets. They're not in the model. Maybe if you're lucky, if you have a portal, maybe they're using the portal to access this content, but they're not going in, they're not thinking as part of that process, let me go break my flow of analysis, and now, because I don't understand this, let me go look in the governance tool for it. They just will sort of go, okay, well, I'm not sure, but let me just keep on looking at this, or let me go ask an analyst for this question, etc. So the fact that it's just not part of the regular user journey that they go through every day for most users means that people will not use it. And so these three factors, to work together to create this vicious cycle where you're really not going to get the engagement that you want. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is really to get all of this value information that you have in your data catalog, and to deliver that metadata, and more than what's in the data catalog, but to deliver the metadata, the things that you want people to know, to the point of consumption. Right? So what I mean by that, if a user's looking at a dashboard, at that point in which they're looking at the dashboard, that's when you want to be able to make all the key metadata accessible to them. And if you do that, then it's in their flow, it's right there accessible, and they're going to see it and they're going to benefit from it. Same for the analyst, right? When I'm looking for something, make the things that I need to make accessible to me in the place where I'm working, right? And we should think about this metadata broadly, right? So sure, this metadata is going to come from the data catalog, right? There's going to be a whole bunch that is going to do that. All the lineage information, many things that you set in the data catalog, custom variables, things of that nature. But in a enterprise, in a complex enterprise like you have, it's not the only place, right? Because some of the metadata may be in BI tools that can't be brought into the data catalog. Almost all data catalogs have some ingestion capability for BI tools, but it's not exhaustive. Maybe your tool can ingest Power BI and Tableau, but it can't bring in Click or content, or it can't bring in a Cognos content or something like that, right? And you have a heterogeneous environment. You need to be able to bring in metadata from those tools themselves. Who's the owner of a product, other tagging, things like that, the descriptions, names, all those things should come from the BI tools themselves when they're not in the data catalog already. And then there is always this metadata that lives in the business. Right? Business users are never going to go into a data catalog tool and add metadata on a wide scale basis. Those tools, as we discussed, are just too complicated for them. But they may have spreadsheets where they maintain all kinds of metadata about the reports. Whether it's line of business responsibility, various things from a compliance perspective, things of that nature. We've seen all our customers. We see all kinds of spreadsheets that people are using to track metadata, ownership, etc. And this especially applies to those reports that are not generated out of traditional BI tools. Maybe there's Excel spreadsheets that are being shared around, a monthly financial forecast, or a performance versus budget, or sales analysis, where it's going into a spreadsheet that's being distributed or shared with people, accessible via SharePoint or some portal or things of that nature. So all those things, if there's metadata around that, tagging, other things, you need to be able to bring that in. Right. So if you've tagged it in SharePoint and you're consuming it, you should be able to see it at the point of consumption. And it should be available, of course, if you're managing it manually. And then finally, there's those set of metadata that doesn't exist but needs to exist on the object. And so when you're onboarding the content into your governed environment where people are going to be using it, in that scenario, you need to be able to provide the ability for users to come in and say, yes, here's the governance metadata that's missing, doesn't exist in my data catalog or in BI tool or Excel anywhere, but I want to be able to onboard it as part of bringing this content on. Right? So all of these different kinds of metadata have to be all weaved together and presented together to the user. The other key thing, as we talked about before, is really to think about all the metadata that you have as an iceberg, right? So you've got the metadata and content. So I don't this applies to both BI assets that people might be looking for, but also applies to data sets that you're looking for. Don't make me look at everything there. Bring above the surface just the tip of the iceberg, the part that is really meaningful, that has useful content, the curated dashboards, those tables that actually have the blessed content, the stuff that has been verified and checked and is consistent and it has quality measures on it, and we know for sure is the right information. That's the things that you want to make accessible to the analyst. Make only those dashboards that are actually useful, not the obsolete stuff or the duplicative stuff. Make that visible to the end user. And then leave everything else below the surface, right? It's all there. It's maybe in the data catalog somewhere. Maybe it's in the BI tool somewhere. Maybe at some point somebody needs to go reference it to look at what was done 2 years ago to adjust things. But don't make it visible to users at first glance, because that way you'll keep them focused on the part that is meaningful and actionable for them, and not clutter the experience with a bunch of junk. Right? And then you want to think about this from a persona perspective. So from a consumption of content, you want to look at it and think about, you're not servicing the same user with the same, not everyone needs the same thing, I should say, right? So typically there are 3 distinct personas in your environment, and each of them has very different needs. So let's drill down into that, because any solution you put in place needs to specifically address that. And that's again where one of the traditionally data catalogs focus on the data governance team and maybe a little bit on the heavy content publishers, and they kind of wave their hands and say, yeah, business users can come in and look at glossary returns, but they really don't address those needs. Let's look at what those needs are in a little more detail. So for a business user, right, you want to be able to say, I want to look for my content from anywhere. So that's a primary need. What are the dashboards that I have available to me? I want to find those. I want to find them whether I'm looking at on my website, when on my desktop looking through the web, whether I'm on Slack, whether I'm mobile on Teams. You want to be able to access your content, right? You want to also be able to identify discoverable content and request access to it. So, hey, there's this analysis on sales and nobody's giving me access to, but looks really useful and I want to request access to it. I should be able to find out about it and request access to it, right? So that makes that piece of asset governed, and it exposes that, so that yes, it's in the top part of the dashboard, top part of the iceberg, in the sense that I can discover it, but then I need to request access to get it, right? I want to be able to understand the definitions. So again, no sense the fact that somebody has tagged this content in the data catalog or tagged in a Mindrel BI tool or added a bunch of metadata to those. If I can't see that information when I'm looking for it, when I'm accessing it, it's no good. So I need to be able to do that. I need to be able to understand what are data usage constraints around this. Hey, does this contain PII data? Does this dashboard contain confidential information? How am I supposed to treat this information? This spreadsheet contains PI data. What am I allowed or not allowed to do with that? So understanding all that at the point of consumption, critically important from a governance perspective. And then I need to be able to get to all of my analytic content in one place. So again, assuming here that there's no way to have governance unless you have a governed space, right? A place where all the content is brought into an environment where I can access it all with a single set of governance principles in place. And that's really the portal solution. So thinking about content publisher for a moment now this is different needs here, right? The content publisher, they want to be able to search for certified data sets and build new visualizations, right? And again, don't give me every single data in set that we have in the company that has the word sales in it, right? Because that's bazillion of them. Give me the ones that are actually that have been published as certified, that somebody is vouching for the quality of, that I can look at, so I can decide between 2 or 3 or 4 sources that are all good versus 300 different tables of which I don't know which one is any good, right? Understanding the lineage, so that when I use this data, I understand where does it come from, what are the rules that are applied, how is it transformed to get there, right? So give me the context of that information. Tracking usage for my content. So if I go build something off of things and I publish it, I need to know from a governance perspective, who's using it, and how often is it being used, and how is it used, right? So that I can know whether I'm publishing things that are really used. What kind of feedback is there on my content? Do people like what I'm creating or not? Again, part of governance is being able to close the loop and adjust and say, no, I'm going to improve based on the fact that users are finding that some of my dashboards are lacking. Well, let me go fix that. Well, let me go address that when the next set of dashboards that I work at. I want to be able to promote content. If I've created something and it's really valuable and nobody's using it, I want to have a mechanism by which I can say, hey, take a look at this because this is important, to make sure the right audience has access to that promotion. So that's the publisher. Then what about the governance team, right? The governance team has got its own set of needs as well, right? They've got to be able to say, I want to be able to understand, which of my dashboards contain sensitive data. Those are points of exposure, right? Each of those points are there. So I want to make sure that business users that are using those dashboards actually understand and have indicated that they understand how they can use that data, right? So it's not, because a lot of times what happens with governance is we do a great job of identifying where the sensitive data is in our tables, and then we stop. Well, that's crazy, right? Like, what use is that? Because everybody's not consuming that data through tables. They're consuming it through dashboards and Excel spreadsheets and other things that they're pulling that data in. So if we have not taken and flagged what contains sensitive data all the way up the chain, and more importantly, if somebody looking at that does not know that, hey, here's how I'm supposed to use that sensitive data, then we have not really done anything from a truly from a compliance perspective. We've just sort of, it's been a rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, I guess, tying into the iceberg analogy there. I want to be able to, so I need to be able to do that. I need to be able to understand these terms of service, these things that say, here's how you should be using this content. As a data governance person, I've established those terms of service. I need to make sure that I know that users have actually read, they've acknowledged those, so and there's compliance with that. And I need to be able to know that the reporting data sets that contain trusted data have been certified, and that that certification information is going all the way up the chain to the point of consumption. Again, so users know I'm using a dashboard that's based on certified data, therefore I can trust it. So all those things are necessary, and the governance solution has to solve that. And then the final key piece is, you know, the data catalog is a very important piece of the overall puzzle. It just doesn't solve the whole puzzle, right? So the idea is that your solution, in order to generate usage of the data catalog, it needs to be a driving point or a launching point into the data catalog itself, right? So I ought to be able to surface that top part of the iceberg, as we talked about, right? To see the most relevant content, the most relevant pieces of metadata, and make that broadly accessible to everyone in the organization. But I should also make it possible for people to say, hey, I want to know more. I want to dig further. And then take you into the data catalog, assuming that you have a license to use it, to be able to do the further analysis, to understand more about lineage, to understand more about, well, what are the secondary, tertiary sources here? What else can I learn from what we've captured in the data catalog? Maybe I'm somebody who maintains this information. Let me go in and fix some of this information because it looks like it's being represented to others in a way that's slightly inaccurate. So having the whole ecosystem integrated, where your portal and your consumption model is actually linked into your data catalog, so you can just click and drill directly into it, is vitally important. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who can show you a little bit about how we think about this in Metric Insights specifically within our product, and how we solve for some of these problems.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Yeah, so as Marius said, obviously over here at Metric Insights, we're trying to solve some of these issues as it relates to governance. And really what we're proposing here is that everyone needs some sort of portal within their organization to manage content from different sources from a BI perspective, and that's everything from sort of spreadsheets to BI tools and everything in between. And that you should really be integrating that portal with your underlying data catalog solution, whatever that might be, so that you can start to benefit from some of the tasks that Marius was talking about, that you are doing within the catalog, so that it's not just a minority group who are using that tool who are benefiting. It's really providing some benefit to the whole organization. So I'm going to loosely take you through sort of those three personas and look at sort of what functionality might be relevant to each of those areas, and how that might come to fruition. And just to sort of level set here, so what you're looking at here is the Metric Insights portal. We're in our catalog view here, our library view, if you like, where anyone who's seen a demo of our product before, each of these tiles is basically content coming from a particular underlying source, whether that's BI tools like Tableau and Power BI and BobJ, whatever it might be, whether it's maybe spreadsheets up there on file stores or SharePoint or OneDrive, whether it's data sets that we want to publish for our analysts to be able to find, whether it's data science applications. The general concept of any portal is that you can not deliver everything to users, but curate, as Marius said, the key content that you want to make available to end users across the organization. And the curation of this content, as we'll see in a minute when we look at sort of the publishing of it, can be driven by your catalog. So if you are sort of tagging key assets within the underlying catalog, you're certifying things there, that might drive ultimately what gets delivered up into this portal. But it's certainly not everything, as Marius said. We don't want to clutter end users with too much content. So the general idea behind the portal that we'll be looking at is, again, that this is the place where everyone from sort of the analyst to the business user can search and consume information that's relevant to them, that is the tip of the iceberg, as Marius spoke about. For the sake of this demo, we're actually connected into an Alation environment. But really, the underlying catalog is obviously going to be relevant to the technology that you're using. But typical to these technologies in our Alation environment, we've gone through and sort of connected it, in this case, to Tableau, and we've got Power BI in here. And what's typical, as Marius said in the slides, is when you connect to things like your BI tools, there's some level of metadata getting captured and added. There's some level of lineage. So we're classifying the content in here. We're identifying PII data. We're tagging it with the line of business so it's relevant to the tool is capturing lineage, as you'd expect. So a whole host of metadata is being added to our content within the underlying tool, in this case, Alation. Similarly, we're pointing it at our underlying databases, where we're looking at table and view information, and we're going through a similar process, probably behind the scenes, of tagging and categorizing content at this level. So, within, in this case, Alation, we're building up, where we can, this whole library of content. And again, it's typically everything. It's trawling through everything. It's trawling through all our tables and content, and where appropriate, we're identifying things that we want to capture. So, if reality is our end users aren't going to be coming in here every day when they're consuming this content, we want to be able to drive it into the portal itself. So, I was looking at before, here's a set of content that we've curated in, and the top left one here is this Tableau workbook that we were just looking at in Alation. And when I publish this into our centralized portal, I want to make sure that I'm pulling in the necessary metadata that's interesting to the end user from Alation, or whatever source this metadata might be coming from. So in this case, as I preview this piece of content, I'm picking up the name and the image of what it looks like. I'm pulling in any fields down the bottom here that might be useful to my user from Alation. So we've just, to make it obvious, we've called it that. So we've got, the classification of the content, say that it is confidential. This was being picked up automatically, in this case, the line of business, so it's appropriate to. But we're also potentially picking up metadata from elsewhere. So, these glossary terms that describe the metrics may be coming from the Alation glossary, or as Marius said, they may be coming from a spreadsheet where these definitions are being captured. Regardless, we need to be pulling that in and delivering these definitions again at the point of consumption. We might be pulling the ownership in from Alation. We might be pulling the descriptions, etc., in from there. So all in one place now, as I'm consuming this piece of content, suddenly as a user, right where I'm working within my workflow, I've got the context around what this particular asset is, leveraging the work that we've done in the underlying data catalog tool. I know what it is, I know what's defined in there, and I know how it should be being used because of this classification. And if I drill into it, in the portal case, I should be kept within the portal. I'm now interacting with Tableau in the same space with, again, the necessary metadata that I need to understand how to use this particular piece of content. So we're pulling and exposing the work that we're doing in the catalog to the end user, in this case, at the point of consumption. And what's important is that should happen regardless of tool, whether it's Tableau I'm looking at, whether it's Power BI, whether it's a spreadsheet that we're connecting to in data store, the corresponding classification should flow in and get delivered to the user at the point of consumption, so that when they're looking at this content, in this case a spreadsheet, they know exactly what it is and how it should be used. When we search for content as an end user, so within our portal here, I can run searches. That search should make use of that metadata as well. So, as we search through the content, we should search through the curated set of content that I, as a user, have access to. So again, that tip of the iceberg. But again, you can see that it can search through the metadata that we're also pulling in from the catalog and bring me back, again, ranked sets of results that I can then filter out and find what I'm looking for. And that search should search through the curated set of content that I as a user have access to based on my permissions and my security permissions. But it should also, as a user, allow me to discover content that maybe I don't have access to that's been made discoverable. So as a user, responsible for a particular area, maybe I'm interested in finding out whether we have any reports or dashboards around procurement data. And in this case, there's procurement dashboard that has been published. So it sits in that tip of the iceberg because someone's decided that it's important and they've classified it and they've marked it as, confidential in this case. It's been pulled into the portal, but my permissions have dictated I don't actually have access to this yet. Therefore, it's blurring out the image and it's putting a padlock on it. But the portal should then allow me to request access to that if it's something that I might find useful. So in this case, the portal allows me to request access. It can push off a notification to the owner of this content, which we may have picked up from the data catalog, and request access for me as a user, and allow me to then use this particular asset if someone gives me access to it. And with that, we're sort of democratizing the content that's getting created across the organization. In the old world, I may have searched for procurement content, not found anything, and requested that someone build me something, even though it sort of exists there in a certified way. So as an end user, it should be easy for me to look through the content that's been curated and benefit from all that work that's gone into the data catalog in terms of understanding what the content is and how it should be used, and discover any content that's out there. If we think about sort of the same scenario from an analyst perspective, when they're using the portal, they're really typically trying to do two things initially. They're trying to say, okay, I want to create an asset. Does anything exist already? And therefore, I can utilize that. Or is there nothing out there and I want to create something? So they may similarly go and search for dashboards and reports and data science applications and spreadsheets to see what exists today, so as not to sort of duplicate effort that's already been created. But they may also be interested in more of the data set side of things. So if I don't find an asset that's interesting to me, well, maybe I want to go and start searching for data sets that might be interesting, because I want to create something on say sales data out there. So when I search, I may restrict my search to data sets rather than just looking at the assets. And these data sets, again, may be pulled in from the underlying catalog because they've been tagged as certified and something that's useful to analysts and contains the correct data. So in this case, when I've run my search, it's looking through some data sets. I found a sales data set here, a daily sales data set. In this case, it's looking through the columns that exist within a table. I can see that Marius has actually certified this as something that can be used. And similarly, if I click into this, it may have been tagged and categorized in the underlying Alation tool again, in our case. And we've pulled that information into the point of consumption where the analyst is looking for this type of information. So in this case, I can see the table. I can see the categorization and the ownership of this table, the tagging, columns, which may have descriptions and tags on themselves. I can also expose the lineage for this particular asset as well. So in this case, we have this table. It's sitting in a Snowflake database, I think, in this demo environment. And it's driving, in this case, a Tableau workbook that we have out there already. So, if I'm looking at creating data on this table, I probably want to see again what else has been created, so I don't replicate it. And in our case, we take it further. So this particular workbook has been published into our portal as tiles within the portal for different users, and it's also going out in a number of distributions where users are consuming this particular workbook via email in this case. So I can see, where this data is being used downstream for the users of the portal that we're looking at. And obviously I can drill into this lineage and look at it in more detail. So as an analyst, as well as seeing what content is out there, I can also look at creating new content on certified data sets based on, again, potentially what's coming from the underlying data catalog that we were looking at before. It's worth talking briefly about how content gets into a portal like Metric Insights. So as again, we said before, Marius said before, we don't want to take everything that is being cataloged within our underlying data catalog or within the underlying BI tool and push it directly into the portal. We're just going to create a lot of clutter of duplicate and obsolete content. We only want to push in the things that have maybe been certified within the underlying catalog, or that we choose to publish because we've categorized it in a particular way. And within the Metric Insights platform, we can use this concept of publishing workflows to make sure that only certified content is getting out to the end users. And a publishing workflow in Metric Insights is where we pick up the content that we want to review, again, based on the fact that maybe it's tagged in a particular way or it's been certified within our catalog. And we push it into a workflow that has one or more steps within it where different personas, maybe the developer, maybe the business owner, maybe the data steward, is responsible for reviewing the content before it gets published and certified at an appropriate level with accountability into the catalog that we were just looking at in Metric Insights. And each of these stages, a user may be responsible for further enriching the metadata that we're pulling from the catalog, as Marius said. So we may be picking up the classification and the tagging from the underlying Alation catalog, but we maybe also want to attach documentation or set further ownership that doesn't exist in the catalog before ultimately it goes through the process and gets published and certified for our end users. So the publishing workflows can work in conjunction with how we're pulling things into the underlying Alation catalog to make sure, again, that only relevant content is published to end users, and only the content that we want out there in a discoverable way is made available to end users through the portal. Another thing that the end users are interested, the analysts are interested in tracking to close the loop on this is how their content is getting used, and the portal can pick up usage of this content, and it can also collect feedback from users. So as users are accessing content within the portal, we're tracking the usage of that, or whether they're accessing it in the underlying tool directly or whether they're consuming it via email. We're picking up effectively an engagement number, a number of views around how often this content is getting used. And we're also allowing users and prompting users for feedback, subjective feedback. What do they think about this particular asset? How would they rate it? Do they have any feedback on it? And the idea behind this then is, as an analyst responsible for the content, over time, I can start to review and attest to its relevancy still. So I can look at the engagement of that particular dashboard over time. I can look at any feedback or ratings that have been given to it, so that I can then make informed decisions when I review this every 90, 120 days to say, this is something that maybe should remain in our catalog, remain in our portal, or it's something that's sort of become obsolete that we maybe want to retire, or it's something that we want to update to make it more relevant. So as an analyst looking at content and publishing content, I need to be continually coming back to it and reviewing it and making sure it's still relevant, so that, again, we're keeping the tip of the iceberg relevant and useful for our end users. So the analyst, again, is benefiting from any metadata and lineage and curation that is going on within the catalog itself to make sure that they can understand what users have access to and what the opportunities are in terms of building new content and which data sets they should be using. The final thing I want to touch on is sort of more of the sort of traditional, I think, governance persona, where if in our catalog, in Alation in this case, we have gone through and we have classified content and we've maybe identified PII data or sensitive data, and we've developed within our catalog terms of service around how content should be being used based on its classification. Well, we want to make sure again that users understand that, end users have that context that we're putting in place. So if we are publishing things into our portal for consumption, maybe we have a financial statement that is, does contain highly sensitive financial information that obviously we want to make sure that users understand a terms of service and usage policy around this data, and we've tagged it appropriately. We want to make sure that we're sort of announcing to users that that usage policy does exist and that they should go and review and actually accept the fact that they understand the usage policy around this. And so we need to be making sure that those announcements are being made at the point of consumption with the content, regardless of what that content might be. In this case, a spreadsheet that we're presenting in a read-only format here as a PDF. And so we need to be making those announcements at the user level, allowing them to review those usage policies, and then accept that they understand those terms of service. And as a steward then within the portal, I should be able to understand that for that usage policy, in this case, that compliance policy, who has actually gone through and accepted those terms of service, who is still outstanding that I maybe want to chase up to make sure they do understand that, and have an audit trail of how that usage policy is being accepted within the organization. Because again, if I'm going to go through the process of tagging content and classifying it and defining it within the underlying catalog, that's useless if it's not making it to the end users and how they consume it. So hopefully that's giving you a sort of look into how, by connecting your portal to the underlying data catalog, to the underlying work that you're doing from a compliance perspective, you can start to benefit from the underlying work that you're doing within the catalog itself, and start to benefit from that. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks for taking the time to look at this. Again, this is going to be made available through the BrightTalk platform as a recording. We'll send out a link to that recording once it's processed on the back end, and look out for more webinars that we'll be advertising in the near future. And thanks for your time as well, Marius, on that one.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks everyone for joining us.